Okay, as people begin to arrive, let's get started. Everyone knows that's our plan. So a very warm welcome to what is our 42nd Security Thought Leadership webinar. We've been here every Tuesday and every Thursday throughout this crisis, and other days too, as it happens, bringing you a thought leadership webinar where every week we debate an issue of relevance to the security sector. And the idea of thought leadership is that by critiquing and evaluating what's going on today, we get a better type of security tomorrow. And my panel today is going to be debating a topic that has been at the forefront of debate. Mental health well-being and the security sector, how it manages its staff and how it responds to others. And those of you who are regular attenders will know that this issue of mental health and security, mental health and the crisis, has been at the forefront of concerns. So we'll be debating it. My very grateful thanks to Social Stories Club for supporting this. You may not have heard of Social Stories Club if you're in the security sector, but they offer gifts where each one's got a sort of social story attached to it. So if you're looking to give a gift to someone, corporate or personal, thank you very much indeed to them. We thought that was an appropriate one to do today. And also our supporters, thank you very much indeed. Now in a second, what I'm going to do, as usual, is I'm going to introduce our four panelists, or I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. And once all four of them have done that, I will then come back to them and ask them their opening statement. And once we have that, I will then come to you, the audience, and invite you to ask the questions. I would encourage you to get your questions in early, and don't forget to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, let's get going. And our first panelist is Yolanda. Yolanda, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi Martin, thanks very much for having me here today. I feel very privileged to be a part of this panel. My name is Yolanda Hamblin. I work for DS Security Operations, where we have an ARC up in Doncaster. So my perspective really comes from 7 years in policing, 10 years in security and man-guarding, and now I've kind of moved over to the technical side with pioneering technology. I'm a member of ACIS, and I also sit on the advisory board for the International Foundation for Protective Officers. So for protection officers. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Yolanda. So let's go over to India and ask Harmy to introduce yourself, please. Harmy.
Hi, thanks, Martin. I'm Harmy, and I'm calling in from Mumbai, India. I am an executive ontological coach. I'm a PCC with International Coaching Federation, and I've been coaching for the last 9 years, senior executives across the globe. I'm also a new field certified coach, which is an organization that trains leaders and coaches to use an ontological framework of coaching. And I have deep interest in mindfulness, so I'm also a yoga instructor.
Thank you very much indeed, Harmy. I appreciate that. Now let's go to Philip. Philip, please introduce yourself.
Philip Ingram, I am a sort of gamekeeper turned poacher. I'm a former senior military intelligence officer, having spent 26 years in the British Army, most of my career as a planner and a senior intelligence officer. And I'm now a journalist and run my own media company called Grey Hair Media, reporting on all matters security, intelligence, counterintelligence, global geopolitics, and an awful lot more. I also describe myself as a depression and PTSD survivor, more of which you'll hear a little later. And therefore, I've got practical experience of the subject that we've been in, having had some complex issues myself that I'm very pleased to say I've managed to get normal me back and out the other side. And that's one of the key messages I want to get across today. For those who want to know more of my story, there is a link in the chat that's there. Please feel free to click on that, and you can watch, listen, or read about it in some of the Sunday paper links that are there.
Thank you very much indeed to you. And finally, Pippa, can you please introduce yourself, Pippa?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Pippa Seed. I work as a trainer. I'm an instructor for Mental Health First Aid England. Train people to be mental health first aiders in all sorts of settings. I work with young people and run a youth course, and also in the workplace, and run an adult course training people to be mental first aiders and learn how to support other people, and also how to look after their own mental health. I'm also a personal life coach, something I have done for the last eight and a half years, which I thoroughly enjoy. I also support several people, which I have done for many years on a one-to-one basis, who struggle with quite severe mental ill health. And I'm very much looking forward to this discussion today.
Thank you very much indeed. Panel, you've got to admit, audience, we do bring you really engaging people from around the world. So let's get off with our opening statement then, please. Yolanda, your insights on this issue, please. Yolanda.
Well, I think speaking for the physical security manned guarding sector, I think we're already talking about a group of colleagues who are already pretty much on their own a lot of the time in their job. And then if you put on top of that the other compounding issues, personal experiences in relation to COVID, health and family, job insecurity, there's an awful lot of things there for individuals to have genuine fear about. And I think from my perspective, I think there is a greater need now to have far better personal contact with our colleagues than we've ever had before. So just talking to a colleague today, I've become aware that there are very senior leaders within our industry going out in the middle of the night, still touching base with our colleagues, working right on the front line, often on their own, and at night time where they're very, very isolated. And I think one of the key things is to see leadership acting very proactively, making sure that our colleagues on the front line always have somebody to talk to, feel part of a team rather than feeling on their own. Because it really is, when you're working at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're doing a patrol on your own around an empty building, it really is quite lonely. And at those sorts of times, talking to colleagues, that's when you have the greatest amount of time to think negative things. I often sort of say, you know, how do people feel when I email them, and how do they feel when I talk to them face to face? And I think going that extra mile, whatever that extra mile is, and making people feel part of the organisation is now as important as ever.
Thank you very much indeed, Yolanda. I appreciate your opening statement. Now let's go over to India, and Harmy, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. So well-being, as the topic says, for security, well-being has been very, very close to my heart. And as an ontological coach, I've realized that when I work with my clients, I explore their internal landscape, which is not just at a mind level, but also their somatic, physiological level and the emotional level. The biggest challenge that I face is because we are part of a culture where it's declared that rational thinking is what makes us great human beings. In fact, René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And he declared into the world that rational thinking has a higher strata and not so much as irrational thinking, emotions, or the physical aspects of being a human in this world. So as an ontological coach, I bring in an integral aspect of us as human beings so that we can turn to having conversations which we've never had before in business settings. And these conversations are around emotions, the moods that are generated from the cultures that we come in from, or the discourses that we have listened to while we are growing up, and therefore it plays as a narrative in our mind, and we occupy that space through which certain possibilities are available and certain not. With the pandemic coming in place, as I mentioned, I'm an ontological coach. I have a practice of yoga, I have a practice of meditation, but me myself, fell into those natural tendencies which I had, which was an overwhelm of anger with the crisis that hit. So if somebody like me who had practices in place to take care of myself and my well-being could fall into those triggers and those natural tendencies, people out there who are facing so much of stress, especially security industry, are likely to be falling prey to a lot of these tendencies. And once they are pushed to the foreground to be triggered, obviously they are not delivering on the results that they need to, which is to be really sharp, on the ground and achieving what they need to achieve. So I think it's a very relevant topic. It has always been mental well-being as well as emotional well-being to me. And it has become even more important as the context has moved to uncertain and chaotic, world that we are living in.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to go to Philip and ask Philip for your opening statement. Philip, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Martin. And nice to meet everyone, even if it is in a virtual environment. 16.5 people, I'll not say who the half person is, who are on this event will have suffered or will be suffering some form of mental illness. 1 in 4 are the general statistics that are out there. That's before we start to put people into more complex and more pressurized work environments where you're getting additional stressors that are put in. So it is something that is not unusual in the workforce. It is something that is not unusual in society. It's something that is not only suffered by someone else, but it is something that if you suffer it and you interact with other people, you can see them not wanting to talk to you or to disassociating themselves from you because they don't want to catch it. I have suffered that. That is because there is a lot of stigma around mental health, and as soon as someone starts to talk about it, there's a lot of misunderstanding about mental health and what causes it and how it can be cured. Most mental health conditions will pass with little or no interaction from professionals. Some mental health conditions require some interaction, but it's like any illness. If you interact very early, it can be dealt with and treated very early. If you have a cold and you treat it properly and you get the right rest and drink lots, you stop it turning into pneumonia. If you get it into pneumonia and you get the right level of antibiotics and professional treatment, it stops it killing you. It's the same with mental health issues. And therefore it is something that we should accept within society is inevitable in a proportion, and quite a large proportion of the people that you're going to interact with, whether it be professionally or whether it be personally, and recognize that if someone is suffering, you understand what the symptoms are, you understand how to treat them, you understand how to deal with people rather than in ways that will exacerbate the conditions. And I believe it's not helped by our society where everything from the highest political level down to the which football team do you support seems to be based from a social media perspective on I hate the other side. And that just exacerbates the level of pressure that's potentially put on people. But at this very early stage, I want to just emphasize the fact that it is a normal condition, it is a treatable condition, and it is a condition where, and I've hit probably the highest levels of severity of some of the conditions that are through there, but come out the other side and got proper me back. And that's the thing that you have to recognize. There is the same individual or a proper individual or someone who's going to come out of it stronger at the other end, who's in that suffering pattern. And therefore, at times, we all may need a little bit of help. Make sure that you're in a position where if you suspect someone may be suffering in any way, that you're there giving them the help in the way that you would want them to help you if you're ever in that position, because there's a good chance you may be.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I just remind the audience, the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Please can you get your questions in early and we'll get to you after our final opening statement. Pippa, your opening thoughts, please.
Yes, I would very much like to say I agree with Philip very much that our mental health is very much a part of our overall health, and quite often an area which becomes overlooked and not looked after. We don't practice self-care with our mental health quite often in the same way that we do with our physical health. And as Philip also said in different words, but our mental health, like our physical health, exists on a continuum and fluctuates. It fluctuates at different times in our life. It fluctuates depending on how much support we've got. It depends on how many stresses we have at that particular time. Very many things affect how we cope on that day, in that week, in that month. And at the moment, I think there are so many challenges which are very different for us all. So we've had to adapt to change, but quite often having self-awareness to know what it is that we're really missing. Like for some of us, we are really missing something which is part of our core values system. And that's very individual. Our core values are very individual to us. So one person may be really missing connections and the role that they play within an office environment or a team environment. Somebody else may be missing significance that they get from having feedback from their colleagues. Different people are missing different things. So I'd say it's a good time to spend a little time with self-awareness, understanding what are actually your main challenges, because they're probably very different to other people's, and sometimes we don't actually sit down and think what it is that we're finding really challenging at this time. The other thing that for many of us that is missing in these times are our coping mechanisms. So what do we do when we are feeling really stressed? For some people, might call for a pint on the way home. Not me personally, not very keen on pints. It may well be that we go to the gym, on our way home. It may well be that we meet up with some friends and have a good chat, but some of those things are just not available. They're maybe becoming more available, but available with changes that don't quite feel the same, and possibly with dangers for some people that they just think it's no longer fitting or filling that space. So a lot of people's coping mechanisms are also missing. So it is even more important that we do connecting and listen to people and ask each other. And the sort of great phrase of, how are you? Oh, I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Oh, good. Which is probably not the case at all. Quite often means that things do go unnoticed. So actually asking deeper questions of the colleagues and our friends and family that we are maybe speaking to via Zoom calls and phone calls, asking more opening questions like, what are your main challenges at the moment? You maybe get a little bit of a more open answer, and it's so important to do that, and so important to listen to one another. I think listening is a really underrated skill, and quite often in our time-pressured lives, even people working from home are often working far harder. Time to actually listen to somebody and spend some time on their agenda quite often goes a little bit sparsely, or becomes a little bit sparse. I think also as organisations, it's really important to embrace mental health at the highest levels. There is a lot of stigma around mental health. There is a lot of areas where people assume that they will meet with judgment. It may well be that if they talk about being very stressed or overwhelmed with what's going on for them at the moment, that actually when that promotion comes up, they'll be passed up because they're not good at dealing with things, rather than actually they were willing to acknowledge and have that self-awareness and do something about it. But it sort of gets a bit skewed, and people are afraid of actually talking about their mental health, but that in an organisation needs to come from the top, with examples and sort of leadership in that way from the top, because it's the only way people feel okay and feel safe to show a bit of their vulnerable self, is if actually the people above them on the ladder do the same. So I would encourage you as much as possible in your organisations to lead by example from the top down, to give people that safety and that feeling that they are able to do that without negative judgment.
Pippa, thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's go to questions. Just to remind the audience, question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask a question, get the question in early. As you know, we move fast on this programme. Right, let me come to Harmy first, please. And Harmy, a question here from Andrea Burkhoff, who works for one of the major city security magazine, which is aimed at people working in the city. But one of the questions that she's interested in are, what's the main good mental health tips that can govern working from home? Now, of course, this is nothing new about working from home. There is in this scale, and there is on this crisis. So Harmy, I'll start with you first, and then I'll come to Philip after you. Harmy, your thoughts on this, please.
Sure. So I think the first thing that's coming to my mind as a tip to ensure that we are taking care of our mental health as we are working from home is to have strong boundaries between what we are doing at home and the work that we are doing at home. The biggest challenge that all of us are facing while working from home is that the boundaries are getting completely blurred. So to be able to demarcate your time and to identify those boundaries in your daytime, which is your own and what is dedicated to your work, is extremely critical. The other thing which I find really useful, especially because I work in the industrial, with leaders in corporates, is because there's so much of Zoom fatigue. To ensure that we show up as humans on Zoom, to ensure that we have our videos on as a form of respect for being there, because there's a possibility that we might be doing other things, and it's always good to have that connection online, at least seeing people's faces and not just be off video. And so that's one tip, to remain, to feel connected as part of teams, which is one of the aspects which people are missing when they're working from home, because they're not seeing humans. So to be able to do that also contributes to our, to ensure that we are contributing to the mental health of other people. And I've noticed that a lot of leaders now are learning to open meetings by asking questions around how are people feeling, and showing that care by not just immediately jumping into the task orientation of what needs to be done in that meeting, but also to spend a lot of time just understanding how life is from, working from home. So just opening statements and spending time understanding, the human behind the call that you're having is also very important for the mental well-being of those you are interacting with.
Harmy, thank you. I'm going to stop you there because I'd like to move on and get Philip's view on this. Philip, I'm conscious of, in your opening statement, you made the point, and you're muted at the moment, Philip. I'm conscious in your opening statement, you made the point, Philip, about the fact this is not talked about much when you're in work. I assume when you're working from home, this is an added scale of another barrier. Philip, what can we do?
Well, it is, and it puts the pressure on those that you're interacting with, either virtually, but also those that, if you've got people at home that you're interacting with at home, because we're not getting much interaction with friends and colleagues elsewhere. And therefore, I'd echo a lot of the comments that Harmy said, especially when it comes to boundaries, but it's certain things that you can put in place to help reinforce those boundaries. The first one, the most important one, is have a routine. And make sure you stick to a similar routine in the same way that you would do if you're going into an office environment. But also within that routine, it's important that you prepare for work in the same way that you would do if you're going out. So dress for work. Don't go in your pajamas and sit in front of the computer because it's 2 steps away from the bedroom. And at about 12 o'clock, suddenly think, oh, maybe it's time to have a shower and get dressed now, because you're not doing yourself any good whatsoever. Have a dedicated place for work so that work stays within that little bubble and it's not moving around the house or your apartment or anywhere else, so that it fits in and therefore everywhere gets polluted with that work piece that's in there. And then get a little bit of time and make sure you have that time for yourself and for your family and those that you live with. So a little bit of exercise, getting out, making sure you do that. I've got a 2.5-year-old border collie puppy, and she's fantastic at making sure that I get out, because if I don't, she drags me out. Within that, some family time. So sit down and converse with other people, because any stresses you're bringing in from work, you don't have that commute to and from work to get rid of them. So you're going to try and bring them out an awful lot more in the home environment, and to try and deal with that. And the final bit I'd say is look after each other. So don't be afraid outside the Zoom calls and outside everything else, just to pick the phone up and have a chat with someone, and just ask them how they are and see, if they're okay, and just have a general social chat about other bits and pieces. We've got the time to do it now. And if we do that, and hopefully we can take that further once we get back into some form of normality, whatever that is, that can only be a good thing for the whole of the industry.
Philip, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move on. Yolanda, I'm going to come to you next for this question. And Keith Nielsen asked about 2 parts. What advice would you give to frontline security officers about their mental health? And then I'm going to come to Pippa and ask Pippa the second part of Keith's question, which is about guidance for dealing with those they come into contact with who have mental health issues. So let me go first of all to Yolanda. Yolanda, obviously you're well placed on this one. Interested in your thoughts on this. It's a biggie, isn't it? It's a big issue we've been hearing about.
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. I think we have to ask, do our people feel that they can talk about their mental health to us? And if they don't, I think we've got a big bridge to fill. I know that there are lots of security partners out there who are doing lots of work, connecting with their staff over this period. And I also know that there's a lot of connectivity along with charity work and lots of sporting activities prior to COVID, where lots of money is being raised for charities like Mind. So the awareness is there, but we've got to take this up another level now, simply because our colleagues are out there on their own. They are already in roles that require a tremendous amount of resilience. It's discipline. They have to get up at a certain time. They have to be somewhere at a certain time. They have to carry out diligent duties, sometimes very routine. So they are very resilient people. That's why we hire them. But I think we're asking a little too much if we don't go that extra mile to ensure they know how to be equally as resilient over their mental health. And I think it's about having the doors open. Like I said earlier, when you see and hear stories about leadership in the security industry, rocking up to a site in the middle of the night, just checking in, that means the world to that guy or girl who's sitting on their own at night, really with not a lot to do, that keeps them very positive in some cases. So I think more of that, more connectivity, more group talks. Let's get people, whatever time of the day they work, on a Zoom call, and keep that communication going, and keep asking the question, are you okay?
Yeah, thank you. And Pippa, your thoughts on dealing with those who have got mental health issues. And don't forget, sometimes, Pippa, this is in quite a public environment, which I think adds an extra strain to this. Pippa, your thoughts, please.
Well, firstly, if you're in that situation, it can be really difficult to know what to do. So ultimately, important to try and build a little connection in that situation, if that is quite a public situation, and some sort of trust that you are there to help that person. So I don't really know the things particularly that you have in mind, but I would say when you are offering support to somebody who is possibly are acknowledging that they may be in a state of distress, or it may just be that you've noticed a change which is giving you the sort of inkling that this person is not in a good place with their mental health, and it is showing concern, creating an opportunity for that person to say what is going on for them, and for you to try your best to understand where they're coming from. Quite a common thing is for human beings, when they listen to somebody else who is having a really hard time, it is for us to want to rescue them and offer them lots of solutions and lots of advice. But this can actually be really alienating for somebody. It's much more important to sort of step back and let that person talk, and for you to try and understand what it's like for them, rather than trying to solve their problems. So listening, it will also help you to assess really what the situation is for that person, and then to encourage them to get some support. If that's appropriate, then do your best to encourage. Sometimes you can't do any more than that. You can maybe check in with that person, it depends on the situation, a day or two later, and see if they have done that, to try and encourage them further. It could just be that you're signposting that person. It depends on your situation and how often you see that person, how well you know that person, what your relationship is with that person. But really and truly, creating an opportunity for somebody to talk and for you to listen, but staying with what's going on for them, can really be so supportive and help somebody feel that, wow, somebody's trying to understand where I'm at.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your question. I want to move on because we've absolutely got questions galore here, and I can see the questions, and they're really good questions. So I'm going to move quite fast. And Harmy, I'm going to ask you to be brief if you can. It's a big question from Neil Moscrop, and he's asking about what the early indications are that someone may be beginning to suffer from problems. Because a really good point, it's not so obvious, is it? As Philip was saying a little bit earlier, you can't see it in the same way. So Harmy, what are the sorts of things, big picture, high level, we should be looking for?
Oh, well, from my perspective, when I look at people, there are a couple of things that I look for. One is, what is their eye contact? Are they really looking at me? What kind of eye contact do they have? The second thing is, what is the kind of breathing that they are doing? Is it a full body breathing? Are they really breathing right up here? Or it's a breathing where their body, their chest specifically is expanding or not? So what's the kind of breathing they have? And on task, if we find out that there are mistakes and repetitive mistakes are happening, then we know that this person is not in their window of tolerance and have gone beyond that stress and trauma for a long time.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to ask Philip first, then Yolanda this question. It's from Ivan Capello. And Philip, the question is, what advice would you give to security professionals who wish to seek mental health guidance but are in fear of potential damage to their career? Well, what a great question to ask you, Philip. I mean, because, of course, in some ways, you've been there, but for a lot of people, this is a massive issue, has already been noted. Philip, what do they do? Headline answer, if you wouldn't mind, Philip, we're in rush of time.
Yep, it's a huge issue. When I was in the military, it was career ending, full stop. And I understand the fear completely. Therefore, if that is the position that you're in, your employer has not got a good approach to mental health. However, the next step is, it depends on the level of mental health issue that's there. If you can talk to family, if you can talk to friends off the record, that's a good start. If you can't do that, if you can talk to potentially a colleague that you know that you can trust, that's the next bit. And if it's getting more serious, there are a number of professional charities that are out there and professional organizations that are easy to find. And it depends on your background, depends what it is, which is the best for you. There's a lot of good ones for ex-service personnel, and a smaller number for ex-police and other blue light. And those tend to be a lot of the people that are in the wider security industry. And then if ultimately you're in crisis, then there are the Samaritans. And the bit between crisis and the charities is your GP. I went to my GP, but it took me getting to the point where I recognized I need some form of help. Everyone else around me had known it for years, but I had to make that decision, and my GP signposted me in the right direction, and I got the right treatment. It took a long, long time, but then I got proper me back.
Well done, Philip. Thank you very much indeed. Yolanda, I guess with security officers, it could be about career. It could also be worried about keeping their job, though. Yolanda, so what do they do?
I think we have to remember that the law protects them, but also I think we have a responsibility as an employer to make it a safe space for them to be able to come to us with concerns around mental health. And if we don't make it a safe space, then we can only accept the consequences will be very negative. We need to give people the reassurance that we're on top of their concerns. And the only way we can do that is by keeping a very open dialogue and making sure that that conversation isn't hidden in the darkness, but it's out in the open, and help people to feel very empowered to come forward with concerns that they have, because ultimately it's only going to harm the business.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much indeed. Let me come now to Pippa. Pippa, a question from Radoslav Zavkov. And along similar lines, but a different focus, Pippa. Radoslav's question is, it's a sensitive matter to start talking to people about this issue. So even if you are sensitive and you are thinking along the right way, what's the right approach to start a conversation along these levels? Pippa, can I ask you to be brief, please, because we've got quite a lot of questions. I'm also going to get Harmy's thoughts on this question as well. Pippa first.
I would say, firstly, just go gently and be your authentic self. Express your genuine concern and ask what you feel, you have a gut feeling to ask, because if somebody is in a really difficult place, it's very hard for them to have the courage maybe to tell you. So though it may be sensitive, it's better to ask the questions and show concern and ask how somebody is, ask really where they are and how severe their feelings are. Even if you feel it is a sensitive matter, much better to ask than not ask.
Yeah, okay. And Harmy, your thoughts on this?
I think one of the things that I use to, to ask and inquire about how they're feeling is to help people connect with their bodies, and also ask where are they feeling in their body. because that's the place where people tend to either lose their connection and therefore the form of safety that we all have. So it's a difficult question to ask because many of us have completely dissociated. We feel that we are all here in the head, we are paid for that, we're all credentials, we're all expertise, but we've completely lost the connection from our head to the heart and our body. So to really help people connect with their breath as well as their body is one of the key ways to understand how we can actually shift people from being stressed to people who can actually come back to their own regulation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to touch base briefly with you, Philip, on this, because I guess this was a reality for you at one point. That moment, I suppose, Philip, about how either someone engaged with you or how you would engage. And remember, you've got a slight advantage, I think, in the sense that you've been there and you understand it. A lot of people will come at this a lot more colder. Philip?
Well, for me, the bigger indicator was, and when I'm looking at people, is a change in behavior, especially if you know them. If something has changed, then you have to ask why. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a completely innocent explanation. But if someone's behavior has changed a way that they used to be brilliant, but they're being sloppy and they're letting things loose. They used to be diligent in everything they do, but now they're almost self-harming themselves in the way they're approaching their tasks. And that could be a cry for attention. That's what happened in my case. You know, I was in my personal life the equivalent of self-harming. I'll not go into detail, but it's that then triggered me to the point where I suddenly got through a couple of situations where I said, hang on, this isn't me. And luckily the people around me at that time were supportive enough to turn around and say, that is not you. And I suddenly went, I need to seek help here. And that's what triggered me to go off and get help.
Thank you very much indeed. Yolanda, you deal with people on the front end, and Musaid Al-Naja, and I do apologise if I've not pronounced that correctly, Musaid, is talking about instances where people have actually been involved in a crisis, in dealing with things, and that they come out of this, and may well come out of it having been affected. And I guess the question is about an organisation does have to be very, very on the ball in order for doing this. And I guess anyone involved in frontline security could face that reality. It's a daily issue, a daily risk, Yolanda.
Yes, and I think it goes back to, again, the resilience piece, because a lot of our people are already a little bit more resilient than most. And that's because they're dealing with very different circumstances, very different tasks, very different exposures to very different types of the lives that we probably, you know, in our normal world wouldn't ever see. In fact, it's quite unnerving just walking around an old building on your own in the middle of the night. You're hearing creaks and you start to ask yourself, do ghosts really exist? And it's very easy to get yourself into a little panic. But let's be real. There's a wider picture than that. Let's be better is my phrase. And you know, I think we have to ask ourselves, as their employer, are we in touch with how they feel?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I mean, a lot of what all of you are talking about is the culture of the organisation, and that's cropped up time and time again in different contexts. Okay, let me go to you, Pippa, and a question from Darren Carter, and I'd like to get Harmy afterwards in the sense of India. But Darren's point is that basically he feels the government's line on this has been slight, to say the least, and therefore it's falling on employers to take the responsibility. And a very high level question, Pippa, because we're running out of time. Where does one go to get advice as a company about what the best approach is? Given what's coming through this, everybody's circumstances vary and context of organisations vary. Pippa, I suppose I could come to you, Pippa.
I think it is quite a difficult question because there are an awful lot of gaps. Certainly for me, I would direct people to Mental Health First Aid England. There's a lot of resources and guidelines on their website. But it is actually a very difficult area. There are less and less resources. Sometimes the voluntary organisations are more accessible and give better or more accessible advice than you're able to get from government sources. But I do think it is difficult as organisations. I think what we can do is educate people into learning how to recognise signs, learning how to look after their employees mental health illnesses or mental wellness, and encourage people to seek help at an early stage, because the resources further down the line are quite slight, unfortunately. So maintaining good mental health is actually a lot easier as an organisation than trying to trying to help people if their mental health deteriorates. But obviously it's also vitally important to support them to do that too. But it certainly is easier to intervene at an early stage and help people at that time.
Thank you, Pippa. Just Harmy, very briefly, very briefly, we've run out of time. Harmy, in India, is the government advice good there? Have you got a good supply? I almost know the answer, I suspect, but just in case, Harmy, very briefly, Harmy, please.
Oh, you have the answer already, but the thing is, I think we're just getting our security people to be trained, properly. And I believe that if we can include the dialogue on mental health and well-being in the training module itself, and make, like as Pippa was saying, as a preventive to train them right on the onset, that's going to be the solution, instead of looking at government to be able to solve it for us.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Philip, I'm going to ask you for a very quick answer because we're running out of time, but Erica Gibbons actually has asked a question that I just want to make sure we cover. Is we've done a lot of talking here today about on the front line and about staff and about those they deal with. We haven't actually mentioned leadership so much, but Philip, I guess the point is it might be even more difficult to show forward thinking if you're an individual who's suffering and you're in a leadership position. Philip.
Well, a lot of people in that position won't actually realize that they're suffering. However, I think instead of it showing a weakness from a leadership perspective, certainly in my own personal experience in dealing with people that I've dealt with who've had mental health issues, where I've been able to describe some of the issues that I've gone through. And this was before I'd realized where I was. But even since then, it's actually shown a strength in leadership rather than a weakness in leadership. So it's been able to show that you can get through from a leader's perspective. And whenever someone turns around and says, "Oh, boss, but I didn't realize that you were suffering like that," that then brings that additional strength that's in. One quick point to the previous question, I don't think it's a government issue, and I don't think it's necessarily an employer's issue. It's something that we as a whole society need to get a grip of at all levels and work from a societal perspective to help to make sure that there isn't a stigma around mental health issues.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Well, panel, I have to say, there are so many issues there. There are more questions cropping up, but we're not going to be getting to them all. I'm just going to ask you all very briefly, for just 15 seconds, if you would, each of you, your key thoughts on your main takeaway or your main point you would like to emphasize about how we as a security sector move from here. Yolanda, just very briefly, 15 seconds, no more, please.
Okay, so I put this down to the 3 Ps: proactive, ask questions; people, can they approach us; policy, are we supporting them enough? In essence, the only question I want to leave you with is, how many people in your organization have self-assessed themselves or self-flagged themselves with mental health concerns, as opposed to self-flagging up physical sickness?
That's an interesting question. I don't know what the answer is there. Harmy, just 15 seconds, please. Your main takeaway, please, Harmy.
Well, my main takeaway remains that human cognition is more than what happens in our brain. And it happens actually in our nervous system, which is all over our body. And this nervous system is actually part of biology. So when we are looking to make any change or anything, we need to make sure that we are completely embodying it and talking about our feelings as well as our somatics.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Harmy. And Philip, just 15 seconds, if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah.
please, your final comment.
I'd emphasize that mental health issues are either a condition or an illness and therefore can be treated. A policy is not a culture. Culture is important, and it's vital that everyone within your organization understands that at times it's all right not to be all right.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And finally, Pippa, in just 15 seconds, Pippa, your main takeaway, your main thought, please.
Well, really that is so important for organisations to embrace mental health as a whole, as almost like a team. It's part of the culture of the organisation. And on an individual level, I would say keep in touch with people at these times when people do feel disconnected. Ask how people are, and then ask how they really are. Because quite often you'll get okay to the first answer and maybe a little bit more to the second answer. And listen without offering advice.
Thank you so much indeed. Well, panel, thank you for your answers. That was an absolutely fascinating set of issues, actually. I'm not sure we've ever had a webinar where we've given quite so much thoughts about how you deal with the issue. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for that. And thank you very much indeed to Social Story Club for supporting it. Don't forget, they're the ones who do social, all their gifts are related to some sort of social cause. You buy the gift and they make sure it comes from a social cause. And also for our supporters, for their support. It wouldn't be possible without them. Just to let you know and remind you that the Outstanding Security Performance Awards, the entries are still open in Kenya, Germany, the UK and Romania. Please don't forget to do that. And in India, the winners have been announced. We had an award ceremony on Saturday. It was absolutely fantastic. If you'd like to know who the winners are in India, please go to the OSPA's website. And the techers, if you're involved in economic crime, entries are open till September the 1st. Please make sure you put people forward. It matters a lot that we recognise those who are really good at what they do. And finally, just to say that we go through it all again on Thursday. And on Thursday, we're looking at maximising the potential of big data and protecting people's privacy, the challenges to the security sector. And we've got lots more webinars planned up all the way through to October. We're going to stay here with you, debating issues of importance to you. So once again, thank you to my audience for asking the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through to everyone. Thank you very much indeed to the panel for their expert insights. That was absolutely fascinating. And also in the background, I've got Christine Brooks and Hannah Miller, who once again have done a sterling job. So I hope to see you on Thursday. If not, I hope to see you soon. Until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.